There is a popular habit among modern people to explain away meaningful moments as accidents. We prefer to say, "It just happened," because that explanation requires nothing from us. Yet, deep down, most of us know this is not how life truly works. Certain encounters arrive with weight. They disturb our comfort, interrupt our routines, and refuse to be ignored. These moments are not loud or dramatic. They are often quiet, even inconvenient. But they carry a peculiar pressure, as though something beyond logic is asking a question of our character. When you find yourself repeatedly aware of a particular person's need, when their situation lingers in your thoughts long after you should have forgotten it, you are not merely observing a problem. You are being addressed. Responsibility rarely announces itself with trumpets, it whispers. And the troubling thing about responsibility is this: once it has made itself known, neutrality is no longer an option. To see clearly and still refuse to act is not innocence, it is a decision of another kind. Many people imagine that being chosen means being extraordinary. In reality, it often means being ordinary and available. The world does not fall apart because of a lack of gifted people. It falters because too many decent people wait for someone else to move first. Help delayed is often help denied, not because time runs out, but because courage does. We convince ourselves that we need more resources, more certainty, or more approval, when what is truly lacking is resolve. It is worth noting that obedience, when it matters most, rarely feels heroic in the moment. More often, it feels uncomfortable. You may fear being misunderstood, taken advantage of, or inconvenienced. These fears are not imaginary, they are quite reasonable. But moral action has never depended on comfort. If goodness only required ease, the world would already be healed. The question is not whether helping will cost you something. It will. The real question is whether the cost of refusing will quietly shape you into someone you never intended to become. Every choice we make trains us. Each time we ignore a clear call to act, we become more skilled at ignoring the next one. Likewise, every time we respond with courage, even in small ways, we become stronger, freer, and more truthful. Character is not built in grand moments alone, but in these private decisions where no applause is promised and no reward is guaranteed. Helping one person may seem insignificant when measured against the vastness of the world's problems. Yet this is a dangerous miscalculation. History is not moved forward by abstract compassion, but by concrete acts of mercy carried out by individuals who refused to believe their obedience was too small to matter. A broken world does not need your despair, it needs your participation. To assist one person is not to ignore the rest of humanity, it is to affirm it. There is also a sobering truth we must face. If you are aware of this need, it is likely because you are meant to be. Opportunities for good are not distributed randomly. You have access, insight, or ability that others do not. This is not a burden meant to crush you, but a trust placed in your hands. And trust, once given, must be answered. So act now, not impulsively but faithfully. Do not wait for perfect clarity, it rarely arrives before obedience. Do not wait for others to agree, courage is often lonely at first. Begin where you are, with what you have, and do what is within reach. The act itself may feel small, but its impact on your soul will not be. In choosing to help, you are not merely changing another person's circumstance. You are aligning yourself with the deeper order of things. You are stepping into the role you were quietly prepared for. And long after the moment has passed, you will discover that the greatest transformation did not occur in the one you helped, but in the person you became by choosing to act. Modern life has trained us to distrust meaning. We are taught that events are random, that people cross our path by accident, and that assigning purpose to encounters is a form of overthinking. This habit sounds intelligent, but it quietly empties life of responsibility. If everything is coincidence, then nothing is required of us beyond observation. Yet this explanation fails to satisfy our own experience. There are moments when an encounter refuses to remain casual, when a person's need presses itself into our awareness with unusual persistence. The mind tries to dismiss it, but the conscience does not cooperate. Something within us insists that this moment is not neutral. There is a distinct difference between merely noticing a situation and being morally engaged by it. You may pass dozens of people in a day without a second thought, yet one interaction lingers. You replay the conversation. You imagine what might happen if no one intervenes. This is not sentimentality, it is recognition. The illusion of coincidence begins to crumble when we realize that attention itself is selective. We do not see everything equally. What grips our concern often reveals where responsibility has been quietly assigned. Moral appointments rarely arrive wrapped in certainty. They appear ambiguous, even interruptive. The timing is inconvenient, the circumstances unclear, and the outcome uncertain. This uncertainty is precisely what tempts us to label the moment as accidental. By calling it coincidence, we protect ourselves from obligation. But deep reflection reveals a troubling truth: uncertainty does not cancel responsibility, it tests it. The question is not whether we can prove the moment was meant to happen, but whether we are willing to respond as if our actions matter. Throughout life, people tend to wait for unmistakable signs before acting, something dramatic, undeniable, and risk-free. Yet meaningful responsibility almost never arrives in this form. Instead, it comes as a quiet nudge that can be ignored without immediate consequence. This is why so many moral failures are not loud acts of cruelty, but silent acts of avoidance. The damage is not always visible, but it is real. When help is withheld under the excuse of coincidence, need does not disappear, it simply remains unmet. There is also a subtle arrogance hidden within the idea of coincidence. It suggests that our presence, resources, and awareness are irrelevant, that if we do nothing, someone else surely will. This belief allows us to step back without guilt, but it is rarely true. Circumstances often narrow down who can realistically help. Access, timing, and trust are not evenly distributed. If you are aware of the need, it may be because you are positioned to respond in a way others are not. To deny this is not humility, it is evasion. The weight of these moments becomes clearer when we consider their effect on our inner life. Ignored moral appointments do not simply vanish, they shape us. Each time we dismiss responsibility as coincidence, we reinforce a habit of detachment. Over time, this detachment hardens into character. We become people who see but do not respond, who understand but do not engage. Conversely, when we treat these encounters as meaningful, even without certainty, we train ourselves to live attentively and courageously. It is important to recognize that moral appointments do not require perfection, only participation. You are not asked to solve every problem or carry burdens beyond your capacity. The demand is simpler and more difficult at the same time. Respond honestly to what is placed before you. Action may be small, imperfect, or incomplete, but refusal has a clarity of its own. To do nothing is still to choose, and that choice carries consequences whether acknowledged or not. When coincidence is stripped of its comforting disguise, what remains is a sober truth. Life repeatedly places us at crossroads where our response matters. These moments do not announce themselves as sacred, they appear ordinary. Yet it is precisely in the ordinary that responsibility does its deepest work. To recognize this is not to burden life with superstition, but to restore it with meaning. And once meaning is recognized, the question can no longer be avoided. Not whether the encounter was accidental, but whether we will act as though our response counts. Responsibility has a peculiar way of choosing its carriers. It does not always rest on the most powerful, the most visible, or the most prepared. More often, it settles quietly on ordinary people who never applied for the role. This is unsettling because we prefer to believe that serious obligations belong to specialists, leaders, authorities, or those officially appointed. Yet lived experience contradicts this belief. The moments that demand the most from us frequently arrive when we are least expecting them, and they do so without offering us the dignity of feeling important. What makes this responsibility particularly heavy is its silence. There is no public announcement, no external pressure forcing compliance. The obligation exists whether we acknowledge it or not. This silence is dangerous because it allows us to negotiate with ourselves. We begin to ask whether it is really our place, whether we are qualified, whether someone else might be better suited. These questions sound reasonable, yet they often function as delays rather than genuine reflections. The burden remains patient and persistent, waiting to see what kind of person we will choose to be. Ordinary people struggle with responsibility because it disrupts carefully constructed self-images. Many of us see ourselves as kind, moral, and well-intentioned, but responsibility exposes the difference between intention and action. To be responsible is not merely to feel concern, but to accept cost. This is where discomfort arises. The moment we recognize that something is required of us personally, our time, our energy, our resources, the issue stops being theoretical. It becomes concrete, and concreteness is where excuses begin to collapse. There is also fear attached to responsibility, particularly the fear of making things worse. Ordinary people are not confident heroes. They are aware of their limitations. They worry about saying the wrong thing, offering the wrong kind of help, or being misunderstood. While these fears are legitimate, they can become paralyzing. Responsibility does not demand flawless execution. It demands honest effort. Refusing to act because outcomes are uncertain often masks a deeper fear of exposure. The fear that we will be seen trying and failing. The weight of responsibility is intensified by its personal nature. It does not ask us to solve abstract problems, but to engage with specific people. This specificity removes the comfort of distance. Helping an idea is easy. Helping a person is complicated. People come with emotions, histories, and unpredictability. Yet it is precisely this closeness that gives responsibility its moral force. When a need has a face and a voice, indifference becomes harder to justify, even as avoidance becomes more tempting. Another overlooked aspect of responsibility is how it reshapes identity. When we accept responsibility, we do not merely perform an action, we become a certain kind of person. Conversely, when we repeatedly avoid responsibility, we train ourselves into passivity. Over time, this pattern forms a quiet self-concept, someone who notices problems but does not intervene. This identity is rarely chosen deliberately. It is accumulated through a series of small refusals that seemed harmless at the time. Responsibility is heavy because it cannot be outsourced once it has been clearly perceived. Advice, sympathy, or delegation may ease our conscience, but they do not remove the obligation. There is a point at which knowing becomes owning. Once you are aware that you can help in some meaningful way, you carry that knowledge whether you act on it or not. This is why responsibility feels uncomfortable. It occupies mental and moral space until it is either fulfilled or forcefully ignored. Yet there is a paradox within this weight. While responsibility burdens us, it also dignifies us. It treats us as capable of moral action, not merely as observers of life. To be trusted with responsibility is to be regarded as someone whose choices matter. Ordinary people often underestimate this dignity because it arrives without ceremony, but it is real nonetheless. The quiet weight placed upon us is not meant to crush, but to call us upward into greater moral maturity. Ultimately, the presence of responsibility in ordinary lives reveals a truth we often resist. We are more significant than we think, and our actions carry more consequence than we are comfortable admitting. The weight we feel is not an error. It is evidence that our lives are not morally neutral. Responsibility settles on us not because we are extraordinary, but because we are present, aware, and capable of choosing. And once that weight is felt, the only question that remains is how we will carry it. Obedience is often misunderstood as something dramatic, bold, and immediately rewarding. In reality, it more commonly appears as an interruption. It disrupts plans, challenges preferences, and places demands on moments we had already assigned to ourselves. This is why obedience frequently feels unreasonable before it ever feels right. It asks us to move before comfort agrees, and to act before certainty is secured. The inconvenience is not incidental, it is part of the test. When a call to help arises, our first instinct is often resistance disguised as logic. We measure timing, resources, and fairness. We ask whether this is truly necessary now, whether it could wait, or whether someone else might handle it more efficiently. These calculations appear sensible, but they often miss the deeper issue. Obedience is less about efficiency and more about alignment. It is not asking whether the action is optimal, but whether we are willing to respond to what is placed before us rather than what we would prefer. Inconvenience exposes priorities with uncomfortable clarity. What we call interruptions are usually moments that compete with self-interest. The reluctance we feel is not proof that the call is false, but that it is costly. If obedience were always convenient, it would demand little from us beyond agreement. Instead, it forces a reordering of values, asking us to place responsibility above preference and duty above desire. This reordering is rarely painless. Another reason obedience feels wrong at first is that it undermines our sense of control. We like to believe that our actions are self-directed, carefully planned, and rationally justified. Obedience, however, often requires movement without full visibility. It demands trust in a direction that has not yet proven itself. This vulnerability creates anxiety. Acting without guarantees feels reckless, even when the moral need is clear. Yet many of the most meaningful actions in life begin precisely where guarantees end. There is also social discomfort attached to obedience. Acting when others hesitate can make one appear foolish, excessive, or overly serious. We fear being judged for caring too much or acting too soon. The desire to remain socially comfortable often competes with the call to act rightly. In these moments, disobedience feels safer because it blends in. Obedience, by contrast, singles us out. It places us slightly out of step with the surrounding indifference. Obedience also challenges our self-perception. Many prefer to see themselves as kind and principled without being required to demonstrate it under pressure. When obedience demands action, it tests whether our values are merely held or actually lived. This testing is uncomfortable because failure becomes possible. It is easier to preserve a positive self-image through inaction than to risk exposing its fragility through effort. What is rarely acknowledged is that obedience reshapes perception over time. What feels unreasonable at first often becomes intelligible in retrospect. Once action is taken, clarity follows. The situation reveals aspects that were invisible while we stood still. The initial discomfort fades, replaced by a deeper understanding that could not have been gained through analysis alone. This pattern suggests that understanding often follows obedience, rather than preceding it. Delay is the most subtle enemy of obedience. Unlike outright refusal, delay allows us to feel virtuous while remaining inactive. We convince ourselves that waiting is wise when in truth it is often avoidance. Yet timing is part of obedience. Opportunities to help are not permanently available. They are bound to moments. When those moments pass, the chance to act meaningfully may disappear, leaving only the memory of what could have been done. Inconvenience, then, is not a sign that obedience is misguided. It is evidence that it matters. The inner resistance we feel is a measure of the cost, not the error. Obedience does not ask us to feel ready, but to be willing. It invites us to step forward while discomfort, protests, and doubts linger. And it is often only after we have moved that we realize the inconvenience was temporary, but the transformation, both in ourselves and in the situation, was lasting. Delay is rarely experienced as disobedience. It presents itself as caution, wisdom, or the desire for better timing. This is what makes it so persuasive. Unlike an outright refusal, delay allows us to maintain the appearance of responsibility while quietly avoiding action. We tell ourselves that we will respond when circumstances improve, when emotions settle, or when we feel more prepared. Yet the moral weight of a moment does not pause simply because we hesitate. Time continues to move, and with it, consequences unfold. One of the most overlooked truths about delay is that it is not neutral. Every moment of inaction subtly shapes outcomes, even when nothing visible seems to be happening. Needs do not remain static. They either intensify or decay. A person waiting for help does not experience delay as patience, building silence, but as abandonment or invisibility. What feels to us like thoughtful waiting may feel to another like being forgotten. In this way, delay often communicates something we never intended to say. Delay also alters the nature of opportunity. Certain chances exist only within specific windows. Trust, for example, is time-sensitive. When someone reaches out or reveals vulnerability, they are often doing so with effort and risk. If that moment is met with hesitation, the window may close. By the time we are finally ready, the person may have withdrawn, adapted, or given up expecting anything at all. The opportunity did not vanish dramatically. It simply expired. On a personal level, delay reshapes character in quiet but decisive ways. Each postponed response makes the next postponement easier. What begins as a single instance of hesitation can grow into a habit of deferral. Over time, this habit dulls moral sensitivity. The inner urgency we once felt becomes muted, replaced by rationalizations that come more quickly and convincingly. The longer action is delayed, the less compelling it feels, not because the need has diminished, but because our responsiveness has. There is also a cost to delay that is paid internally. Unacted responsibility does not disappear, it lingers as low-grade tension. We carry it in the back of our minds, surfacing at inconvenient moments. This unresolved obligation competes for attention and drains emotional energy. Ironically, what we delay to preserve peace often produces a deeper unrest. Action, though initially uncomfortable, tends to bring clarity and relief that delay never provides. Another consequence of delay is that it subtly shifts blame. By waiting too long, we allow circumstances to deteriorate to the point where action seems futile. At that stage, we tell ourselves that intervention would no longer help, absolving ourselves of responsibility. Yet this outcome is often the result of earlier inaction. The situation did not become hopeless on its own, it became so through neglect. Delay then presents itself as wisdom, after it has quietly created the very conditions it now excuses. Delay also affects how we understand ourselves. When we repeatedly postpone action, we begin to see ourselves as people who intend good but rarely deliver it. This self-perception weakens confidence in future moments of responsibility. We approach new opportunities with skepticism about our own follow-through. In this way, delay not only affects external outcomes but erodes internal trust. We become less reliable to others and, eventually, to ourselves. It is important to recognize that delay is often rooted in fear rather than reason. Fear of inconvenience, fear of conflict, fear of failure, or fear of being misunderstood all contribute to hesitation. While these fears are human, allowing them to dictate action gives them disproportionate authority. Moral growth requires the courage to act while fear is still present, not the expectation that fear must disappear first. The cost of delay is rarely dramatic or immediate, which is why it is underestimated. Its damage accumulates slowly, shaping relationships, opportunities, and character over time. By the time its full impact is visible, reversal may no longer be possible. What was once a moment requiring courage becomes a lesson in regret. Delay teaches, but its lessons are expensive. In contrast, timely action, even when imperfect, interrupts this pattern. Acting does not guarantee success, but it preserves integrity. It affirms that responsibility was taken seriously when it mattered most. The true cost, then, is not found in acting too soon, but in waiting too long enough for an action to become the most decisive choice of all.